What should be the sample size in qualitative research? This is a question that does not have a straightforward answer. In comparison to quantitative research, where there is generally a straightforward criteria for the selection of sample, qualitative research sample size depends on several factors or several determinants. So in this presentation, we will briefly discuss the main determinants that help us in identifying or selecting a suitable sample size for our qualitative research. First, what is sampling in qualitative research? Generally, sampling is the process of strategic selection, or you can say purposeful selection of participants, sites, events, or documents. So generally, we get data from participants, we get data in certain sites, we get data related to certain events, and we get data from documents through qualitative data analysis. And this data that we collect is generally rich, it is relevant, and it is contextually grounded related to our research questions. In comparison to quantitative research, where the goal generally is statistical representation and statistical generalization, the aim of qualitative sampling is basically to get in-depth, diverse, relevant perspectives and of the participants and to get to the saturation point where we do not get any new data, new information, or new themes from our analysis. So to summarize this, in qualitative research, we do not go for quantitative generalization, and as a result, the sampling process is quite different from the sampling process in quantitative research. Now, what are the main determinants? Before that, we can conclude that there are no universally fixed number of minimum or maximum sample size in qualitative research. And because qualitative research has several designs, or you can say types, so the sample size will also depend on the type of qualitative research that we are conducting, and it is also determined by a combination of methodological, practical, and you can say epistemological considerations. So now, what are the main determinants? So first of all, the most important determinant of our sample size in qualitative research is the purpose of the study. So what is the purpose of the study? Generally, qualitative research has two main types in terms of purpose. One, the studies that aim at broader and more complex aims, and the studies that are a bit narrower. So the larger and more varied the sample tends to be the case when we have broader or more complex research aims. For example, if you're conducting a phenomenological study, which is like a type of qualitative research, and our aim is to explore the lived experiences of one school teachers during online learning, because it's one school, the teachers of one school, generally the sample could be from 6 to 10, it could be maybe lesser or a bit or a few more, but generally this will be a smaller sample. But in comparison, if we are conducting a study, the aim of which is to develop a model of school leadership across the various districts. So we can still conduct qualitative grounded theory research, but in this case, our sample will be more than 6 to 10. It will be, for example, in the range of 25 to 40, or it could be more. So the first one is the purpose of the study. Now, secondly, the research design or tradition. So as I said, qualitative research has several types. Some of the main types include phenomenology, grounded theory, case study, and ethnography, for example. In phenomenology, we often work with 5 to 15 participants that various researchers have suggested. And our aim is to deeply explore the shared experiences of these participants. In many cases, these are deeply personal psychological experiences. So because we are going for depth, we need to have less number of participants in order to explore their views in detail. Similarly, in grounded theory, generally, we are interested in going into depth, but as well as because we also need to develop theory from data, perhaps we need data from a bigger sample and from a more varied sample. So we could start with a sample of 20 to 30 participants, and we could expand until theoretical saturation is reached, or in other words, we could keep collecting and analyzing data until we get to a point where further data collection and analysis does not lead to any more insights into or further themes related to the issue that we are exploring. Then case study is one of the most frequently used qualitative research designs. And in case study, for example, we can focus on a single school with 10 to 20 informants, or we can do multiple case studies requiring larger sets. And similarly, in ethnography, which is like a contextual study in cultural context, we could do long-term immersions in one side. Generally, in ethnographic studies, these are mainly based on observations, and in some cases, interviews, a combination of observations and interviews with participants in the social group. So we can engage with dozens of informants over a period of time. So as you can see, that there will be a variation of sample keeping in view our research design and the tradition that we are following. Then the other determinants include the concept of data saturation. Generally, data saturation is a concept that applies to most qualitative research designs. Generally, qualitative researchers keep on collecting and analyzing data until they reach a point where no further insights are coming out of the data that they're collecting and analyzing. So, saturation basically actually means that we keep on sampling, which actually means we keep on collecting more data until no new significant information or themes emerge. For example, in an educational action research project, we can make use of this saturation if after interviewing, for example, 12 teachers, no fresh insights arise about the effectiveness of a new teaching strategy. Saturation might be considered reached. The next determinant is scope and breadth of the phenomena. So again, this is something like we started in the very beginning. There will be research topics that will need more depth and that will have broader scope, and then there will be research issues that are narrower. So if we have a narrow research topic or question, we will use highly specific number of informants or participants, while on the other hand, a broader phenomena will actually need a diverse range of sample, and so you can say a bigger sample, to get more diversity in the perspectives. For example, if we are studying the role of peer mentoring in one university's teacher training program, we might require fewer participants. But if we are studying, for example, factors influencing students' engagement across different school types, we might need bigger and more diverse samples. So again, the scope and breadth of the phenomena that we are exploring will determine the size of the sample. The next is homogeneity or heterogeneity of the population. In many cases, the data that we get, the sample that we need is more homogeneous. For example, similar age range or similar professions or similar or same gender. While in other cases, our population could be heterogeneous. So the sample will also have a variety of characteristics. So in more homogeneous groups, generally the saturation point is something that we get faster, sooner, and with you can say smaller sample sizes. But in heterogeneous groups, we require more participants to capture variation inside the sample, because the sample consists of a variety of subtypes of people. So, for example, if we are interviewing only grade 10 science teachers in one district, we can see that this sample will be more homogeneous, and so this will require fewer participants. On the other hand, if we are interviewing teachers from multiple subjects in grade levels and regions, we see that there is more heterogeneity in the sample, and so there is the chance of more diversity of views, and as a result, more diversity in the themes that we are getting from the data. So for this, we will need a more varied and perhaps bigger samples. Then time and resource constraints. When we are conducting research on a practical level, we do not always get ideal conditions. Researchers are often constrained by time and resources. Sometimes they might want to have access to bigger samples, more varied samples, but because there is issue with time and resource, these factors can actually impact the sample size. So for example, in qualitative data collection and analysis, we generally need to go into the depth of things, and it's more labor intensive. We need to allocate more time. We need to have funding for example, to travel and to recruit participants. And we also have personnel limits where we need to recruit people in order to interview or in order to conduct observations. So the time and resource constraints could actually impact the sample of our size, the size of our sample. In some cases, for example, ideally, the researcher would want to have interviews with 30 participants, but if the participants are located in geographically diverse regions and access to them is difficult, this is something that might impact the number or the sample size. Then, for example, a master's thesis on classroom management strategies might include 8 to 12 teachers due to time limits. So master's thesis that you need to conduct, for example, in 6 months or 1 year, in comparison, if you are conducting a study where you have more time, for example, PhD, you can recruit more participants and you can get bigger samples. And the same is the case with resource limits, time limits, and other such limitations. Now, the other important consideration is depth of data collection methods. So in many cases, what we need to do is basically to, for example, if we are conducting in-depth interviews or if we are conducting participant observations, both of these data collection processes or methods generally result in the generation of a large amount of data. Now, this type of data that we get in a very large amount or huge data, if we keep on collecting data, we will collect a lot of data, and it will be difficult to justifiably analyze that data, keeping in view our time and resource constraints. So, because the main purpose of generally of qualitative research is depth and not breadth, that's why often justifying smaller size is like one of the ways out of it. So in comparison to in-depth interviews or participant observation, if qualitative researchers are conducting brief surveys or short interviews, in that case they might be able to have bigger samples. So again, here is an example. If you are conducting an ethnography study which involves daily classroom observations, we may work with intensively with a smaller sample, such as 5 to 7 teachers over a semester. If, on the other hand, we are conducting a study where we do not have constraints of time, we could recruit larger samples. Then availability and accessibility of participants. Again, this is something a very important determinant of the sample size in qualitative research. In many cases, researchers would want to have access to and to get data from large number of or diverse number of participants. But in some cases, some participant groups are not available, and so the researchers do not have access to them. This naturally limits the sample size. So, for example, a study on principals who have successfully implemented inclusive education in rural Pakistan might only identify 6 to 8 suitable participants due to the rarity of the phenomena. Now, inclusive education is a concept that is not, you can say, very well entrenched in the education system in Pakistan. And so if we are interested in the particular schools or the particular educational leaders who have implemented this relatively newer concept in the education system, we might not be able to get a very large sample. So in that case, we could perhaps do with the smaller sample size.